Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Into the Darkness. The smell of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce filled the air as David Bennett adjusted his tie, watching his 8-year-old daughter Emma chase her cousins through his in-laws' sprawling suburban home. 20 years in the military had taught him to read situations, to sense when something was off. Tonight, that instinct was screaming. His wife Jennifer had been acting strange for weeks. Hushed phone calls, sudden trips to the grocery store that lasted hours, and an unusual insistence that they attend this particular Thanksgiving dinner at her parents' house in Connecticut. David had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a special forces operative before transitioning to civilian life as a security consultant. He'd learned to trust his gut, and right now, it was telling him something was very wrong. "David, honey, can you help me in the kitchen?" Jennifer's voice carried an edge he'd never heard before. Her usual confident demeanor seemed fractured, replaced by nervous energy that made her hands shake as she served the green bean casserole. As he approached, Jennifer suddenly grabbed both him and Emma, pulling them toward the pantry with unexpected urgency. The small space smelled of cinnamon and stored preserves, darkness enveloping them as she shut the door. "Daddy, it's dark," Emma whimpered, pressing against his leg. "What's going on?" David started to ask his wife, his voice low but demanding. "Chill. Be quiet," she hissed, her breath hot against his ear. David's training kicked in immediately. He could hear footsteps approaching from the hallway, measured, deliberate steps that belonged to someone trying to move quietly but failing. 2 sets of feet, maybe 3. His hand instinctively moved to where his sidearm would normally rest, finding only empty space under his jacket. Through the thin pantry door, he heard voices. His father-in-law, Harold, speaking in hushed tones to someone David didn't recognize. The conversation was muffled, but he caught fragments. "She told you he'd be here, and needs to happen tonight." Jennifer's breathing was rapid and shallow beside him. Emma had gone completely silent, sensing the tension even at her young age. David's mind raced through possibilities. Was this some kind of intervention? A surprise? Or something far more sinister? The footsteps moved past the pantry, heading toward the living room where the rest of the family was gathered. David heard his mother-in-law's voice join the conversation, her tone artificially bright as she directed whoever these visitors were to the good chairs by the fireplace. "Jennifer," David whispered, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect from soldiers half his age. "Tell me what's happening. Now." But even as he asked, pieces were falling into place. Jennifer's recent behavior, her insistence on coming here tonight, the way she positioned them away from the main gathering. His wife of 12 years was scared, not of the visitors, but of him finding out about them. The pantry door handle turned slightly, and David tensed, ready to spring into action. But instead of opening, they heard Harold's voice. "They're in the study now. Give me 5 more minutes." David felt something cold settle in his chest. Jennifer hadn't pulled them into this pantry to hide from the visitors. She'd hidden them so the visitors could have a private conversation with her family. About him. As if reading his thoughts, Jennifer finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "David, I need you to know that whatever happens tonight, I never meant for Emma to get caught up in this." That's when David Bennett realized his wife had betrayed him. The question was how deep that betrayal ran, and what exactly was about to unfold in his in-laws' house on this Thanksgiving night. The darkness of the pantry suddenly felt like the calm before a storm that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. Chapter 2, Revelations and Foundations. David's military training had prepared him for many things, but discovering his wife's betrayal while hiding in a pantry with their daughter wasn't one of them. He remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing as he listened to the voices in the hallway grow clearer. "The documents are in Harold's safe," an unfamiliar male voice said. "Once Bennett signs them, we can move forward with the transfer. And if he refuses?" This was Jennifer's mother, Patricia. "He won't have a choice," came the reply. "Not with what we have on him." David's blood ran cold. Whatever this was about, it wasn't just personal, it was orchestrated. Professional. His mind immediately went to his security consulting business, the high-profile clients he worked with, the classified information he still had access to through his military contacts. Emma shifted in the darkness, and David gently placed his hand on her shoulder, keeping her calm. Jennifer's trembling had intensified, and he could smell fierce sweat on her despite the cool November air. The pantry door suddenly opened, revealing Harold's weathered face illuminated by the hallway light. "Coast is clear," he said quietly. "They've moved to the study." As they emerged from the cramped space, David's eyes immediately scanned the environment, noting exit routes, potential weapons, anything that might give him an advantage. The house he'd visited dozens of times over the years suddenly felt like enemy territory. "Daddy, I don't like this game," Emma whispered, clinging to his hand. "It's not a game, sweetheart," David replied, lifting her into his arms. He looked directly at Jennifer. "Is it?" Jennifer's face was pale, her usual composure completely shattered. "David, I need you to understand. They made me do this. They have photos, recordings, things that could destroy you." "What kind of things?" His voice was deadly calm, the same tone he'd used when interrogating insurgents overseas. But before Jennifer could answer, Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway. "David, dear, there are some gentlemen here who'd like to speak with you. They're from your old unit." That was a lie. David knew exactly who was still active in his former Special Forces unit, and none of them would show up unannounced at a family dinner. This was something else entirely. "Emma, go find your cousins," David said, setting his daughter down. "Stay with them until I come get you." As Emma reluctantly wandered toward the living room, David turned his full attention to the three adults surrounding him. Harold, Patricia, and Jennifer, three people he'd trusted implicitly for over a decade. "How long?" he asked Jennifer directly. "How long what? How long have you been working with them? How long have you been feeding them information about me, my business, my clients?" Jennifer's face crumpled. 6 months. Maybe 8. "David, they approached me first. They knew things about your work in Afghanistan, about clients you've never told me about. They said if I didn't help them, they'd destroy you anyway. But at least this way, Emma and I would be protected." "Protected from what?" "From the people who want you dead." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. David had made enemies during his military service, warlords, terrorists, corrupt officials who'd felt the sting of his operations. But he'd been careful, methodical in covering his tracks. His transition to civilian life had been clean, or so he'd thought. "Who are they?" David demanded. Harold stepped forward, his face grave. "Son, there are things about your military service that Jennifer never knew. Operations that were classified beyond your typical black ops. The people in the study, they're offering a way out." "A way out of what?" "Prison," Patricia said bluntly. "Or worse." David's mind raced. He'd been careful, legal in all his post-military activities. His security consulting firm handled corporate espionage prevention, not international incidents. "Unless." "Kabul, 2019, Jennifer said quietly. "Operation Silent Thunder. They know what really happened there." David went completely still. Operation Silent Thunder had been a joint CIA Special Forces mission to eliminate a high-value target who'd been coordinating attacks on NATO forces. The mission had gone perfectly, too perfectly. The target had been eliminated along with his entire compound, including several individuals who'd officially never been there. "That operation was sanctioned," David said carefully. "The original operation was," Harold replied. "But what you did afterward wasn't. The gold, David. The $20 million in gold bars that disappeared from that compound." David felt the world shift beneath his feet. He'd taken that gold, yes, but not for personal gain. It had funded 3 separate rescue operations for captured American soldiers, operations that the Pentagon had refused to authorize. He'd saved lives with that money, but officially, those rescue missions had never happened either. "So this is blackmail," David concluded. "This is survival," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. "For all of us." But David Bennett wasn't the type of man who responded well to threats. As he looked at the 3 people who'd orchestrated his betrayal, something cold and calculating settled in his mind. They thought they knew him, thought they could manipulate him like some ordinary civilian. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Chapter 3. The Lion's Gambit. David followed Harold down the hallway toward the study, his mind working through scenarios with tactical precision. 20 years of military training didn't simply disappear because someone threatened him with blackmail. If anything, it made him more dangerous. The study door was partially open, revealing two men in expensive suits seated in leather chairs. Neither looked like government agents. Too polished, too comfortable. Private sector, David decided. Corporate mercenaries. Mr. Bennett. The older of the two stood as David entered. I'm George Hartley, and this is my associate Rick Vaughn. We represent certain interests who are very concerned about your extracurricular activities. David took the offered seat, but didn't shake hands. Cut the pleasantries. What do you want? Hartley smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Direct. I like that. Very well. We want you to transfer ownership of Bennett Security Solutions to a shell company we've established. You'll remain as a figurehead CEO, but operational control will transfer to us. And in return, the evidence of your unauthorized activities in Afghanistan remains buried. Your family remains safe. Your daughter grows up with a father who isn't in federal prison. Vaughn opened a briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. We have bank records showing suspicious transfers coinciding with your alleged rescue operations. We have satellite imagery of you at locations you shouldn't have been. We have testimony from surviving members of your unit. David's expression didn't change as he reviewed the documents. They were thorough, professional, and largely accurate. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed he cared more about avoiding consequences than he did about being manipulated. This is impressive work, David acknowledged. Professional-grade intelligence gathering, which tells me you're not just after my company. You need my client list, my access codes, my reputation in the security industry. Your perceptive abilities are exactly why we need you alive and cooperative, Hartley said. Who's paying for this operation? It's too expensive and too sophisticated for a simple corporate takeover. Vaughn and Hartley exchanged glances. That's not your concern. But David had already figured it out. The timing, the sophistication, the focus on his Afghanistan operations. This was about more than his security company. Someone wanted access to his clients, which included defense contractors, technology firms, and government agencies. This wasn't blackmail. It was recruitment. You're working for the Chinese, David stated, or the Russians. Someone who needs a backdoor into American defense infrastructure. The silence that followed confirmed his suspicions. The beauty of this arrangement, Hartley finally continued, is that everyone wins. You avoid prosecution, we get what we need, and your family stays safe. And if I refuse, then tomorrow morning, FBI agents will arrest you for theft of government property, unauthorized military operations, and conspiracy. Your wife will be charged as an accessory for helping you launder the money through fake charitable donations. Your daughter will watch both her parents led away in handcuffs. David looked at the contract spread before him, noting the careful legal language designed to transfer not just ownership, but complete operational control of his company. They'd done their homework, crafted a perfect trap. Almost perfect. I need time to consider this, David said finally. You have until midnight, Vaughn replied. The paperwork needs to be filed before the federal databases update tomorrow morning. As David stood to leave, Hartley added, Mr. Bennett, I hope you'll make the smart choice. Your family is counting on you. David returned to the kitchen where Jennifer, Harold, and Patricia waited. Their faces showed a mixture of guilt, fear, and desperate hope that he'd simply comply. Well, Jennifer asked. I need to make some phone calls, David replied. Where's Emma? Watching a movie with her cousins in the basement. Good. Keep her there. David stepped onto the back patio, pulling out his encrypted satellite phone, a piece of equipment Jennifer didn't know he owned. The November air was crisp, and he could see his breath as he dialed a number he'd memorized but never written down. Phillips. Mac, it's Bennett. I need an immediate favor. Lieutenant Colonel Malcolm Phillips had served with David in Afghanistan and now worked in Pentagon intelligence. More importantly, he was one of the 3 people who knew the complete truth about Operation Silent Thunder and the subsequent rescue missions. Jesus, David, do you know what time it is? It's Thanksgiving. Someone's trying to blackmail me over Silent Thunder. They have details they shouldn't have. The line went quiet for a long moment. How detailed? Satellite imagery, bank records, unit testimony. Either we have a leak, or someone's been planning this for a very long time. Where are you? Connecticut. They want me to sign over my company by midnight. Don't sign anything. I'm making some calls. David, if this is what I think it is, you're not the target. You're the weapon they're trying to acquire. As David ended the call, he looked back through the kitchen window at his wife, his in-laws, and the two men who thought they held all the cards. They made one fundamental error in their planning. They assumed David Bennett was the same man who'd left the military 5 years ago. But 5 years of running a security company, of staying connected to intelligence networks, of carefully building relationships with people who could move mountains when necessary, had made him something far more dangerous than a retired soldier. He was a strategist with resources they couldn't imagine and a code that didn't allow for forgiveness of betrayal. Looking at his watch, David smiled for the first time that evening. He had 5 hours until their deadline. More than enough time to turn their perfect trap into their worst nightmare. Chapter 4. The Web Unravels. David re-entered the house through the front door, his satellite phone already working to coordinate what would become the most personal operation of his life. As he passed the living room, he could hear Emma's laughter from the basement, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. In the kitchen, Jennifer sat at the table with her parents, the three of them looking like defendants waiting for a verdict. Their faces showed varying degrees of guilt and desperation, but David felt no sympathy. Betrayal, especially from family, was unforgivable. The men in the study, David said, taking a seat across from his wife. How did they first approach you? Jennifer's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee cup. It was at Emma's school, the parking lot after her soccer practice. The older one, Hartley, he knew things about you that I'd never heard. He showed me photos of you in places you'd never mentioned, with people I'd never seen. What did he offer you? Protection, Patricia interjected. David, they made it clear that your past was catching up to you. They said cooperation was the only way to keep Jennifer and Emma safe. David's laugh was cold and humorless. Did you ever consider asking me about these alleged threats? Would you have told us the truth? Harold demanded. You never talked about your military service, never explained why you had nightmares, never told us why you kept that gun safe in the basement with enough ammunition to fight a war. Those precautions were to protect this family, David replied. Something you clearly didn't trust me to do. His phone buzzed with an encrypted text message. Phase 1 was already in motion. David, Jennifer's voice cracked. I know I made a mistake, but they threatened Emma. They showed me pictures of her at school, at her friend's house, at the park. They knew her schedule better than we did. So instead of warning me, you decided to hand over my entire life's work to foreign agents. Foreign agents? Jennifer's face went pale. They said they were government contractors. They are, just not for our government. The implications of that statement hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Whatever justifications she'd constructed for her betrayal began crumbling as she realized the true scope of what she'd helped orchestrate. Oh God, she whispered. What have I done? David's second phone, his regular cell, rang. The caller ID showed Mac Phillips. Excuse me, David said, stepping into the hallway. Phillips, what do you have? You were right. This isn't random blackmail. George Hartley and Rick Vaughn are assets for a private intelligence firm called Meridian Solutions. On paper, they're legitimate security consultants. In reality, they broker classified information to the highest bidder. How long have they been running this operation? At least 2 years. They've been systematically targeting former special operations personnel who transitioned to private sector work. Your company was always the endgame, David. Your client list reads like a directory of every classified defense project in the country. David felt pieces clicking into place. They needed someone with my reputation and clearance levels to provide legitimate access. Exactly. And here's the kicker. Your wife wasn't their first contact point. They tried to recruit your business partner first. David froze. Kyle Morrison? He turned them down 8 months ago and immediately reported the contact to FBI counterintelligence. That's when they shifted strategies and went after your family. Kyle Morrison had been David's partner in Bennett Security Solutions since its founding. A former Navy SEAL, Kyle handled the technical security aspects while David managed client relations and strategic planning. If Kyle had reported an attempted recruitment 8 months ago, Mac, tell me Kyle isn't dead. He's alive, but he's been in federal protective custody since the attempt on his life 6 weeks ago. Someone tried to make it look like a car accident, but Kyle's too paranoid for that. He's been feeding information to a joint FBI task force that's been building a case against Meridian Solutions. Why wasn't I informed? Because they suspected you might be compromised. Your wife's behavior over the past few months raised red flags in Kyle's security protocols. David closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of the betrayal settling on his shoulders. His wife had been feeding information to foreign agents for months. His business partner had been targeted for assassination, and a federal task force had been watching him as a potential security risk. Where's Kyle now? 20 minutes away from your location with a full tactical team. They've been waiting for Meridian Solutions to make their final move. Am I family? That's your call, David. But you need to know, this goes deeper than your wife. Someone in that house has been coordinating with Meridian from the beginning. David returned to the kitchen where Jennifer, Harold, and Patricia sat in tense silence. He studied their faces with new understanding, looking for tells he'd missed before. Harold, David said quietly, when did Meridian first contact you? The older man's face went ashen. I don't know what you're talking about. Patricia? David, I think you're imagining. Stop. David's voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in combat. I know about Kyle. I know about the federal investigation. I know that someone in this family has been working with foreign agents for over a year. Jennifer looked back and forth between her parents and her husband, confusion and horror warring on her face. What is he talking about? David pulled out his phone and showed them a text message from Mac Phillips. Meridian made initial contact through Harold Bennett via his law firm's international clients. Payment records show $200,000 transferred to offshore accounts in his name. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer stared at her father with growing horror, while Patricia's face showed the resignation of someone whose carefully constructed lies were finally collapsing. Dad! Jennifer's voice was barely a whisper. Harold Bennett, the respected family law attorney who'd raised Jennifer to value honesty and integrity above all else, had sold out his son-in-law and granddaughter for money. They said it was just information gathering, Harold said desperately. Business intelligence. I never thought. You never thought what? David's voice was deadly calm. That foreign agent's paying you to spy on your daughter's husband might have ulterior motives? Through the kitchen window, David could see headlights approaching down the long driveway. Kyle Morrison and the federal task force were arriving, which meant this nightmare was about to become very real for everyone involved. But as David looked at his wife and in-laws, people he'd trusted with his life and his daughter's safety, he realized that the federal charges they were all about to face were the least of their problems. David Bennett had a code about betrayal, and forgiveness wasn't part of it. Chapter 5. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The headlights belonged to 3 black SUVs that moved with military precision up the driveway. David watched through the kitchen window as tactical teams deployed around the property, their movements barely visible in the darkness but unmistakably professional. Jennifer, take Emma and go to your old bedroom, David commanded. Lock the door and stay there until I come for you. David, what's happening? The consequences of your choices are arriving. As Jennifer hurried toward the basement to collect Emma, David turned to Harold and Patricia. You have about 2 minutes before federal agents arrest you for conspiracy, treason, and aiding foreign intelligence operations. I suggest you use that time to consider whether you want Emma to see her grandparents led away in handcuffs. Patricia began crying, but Harold's face showed the calculating expression of a lawyer looking for an angle. David, we can work this out. I have contacts in the Justice Department. Your contacts won't help you now. The people you've been working with killed Kyle's wife and tried to kill Kyle. This isn't white-collar crime anymore. It's espionage with a body count. The front door opened without ceremony as Kyle Morrison entered, followed by 6 federal agents in tactical gear. David's business partner looked older, more weathered than when David had seen him 6 weeks ago, but his eyes held the sharp focus of a man who'd survived an assassination attempt. "Hello, partner," Kyle said grimly. "Sorry about the dramatic entrance, but we needed to catch everyone together." The 2 men who'd been waiting in the study, Hartley and Vaughn, emerged with their hands raised, flanked by agents. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the resigned expressions of professionals who'd been outmaneuvered. Mr. Bennett, Agent Sarah Collins, the task force leader, addressed David directly. "We need to debrief you on this operation, but first we need to secure the scene and process the suspects." David watched as Harold and Patricia were read their rights, his father-in-law's protestations about his legal connections falling on deaf ears. The man who'd taught Jennifer about integrity was being arrested for selling out his country for money. "Kyle," David said quietly as the arrest proceeded, "how long have you known about Jennifer?" "For months." Her communications patterns changed. She started asking questions about her classified clients, and she made 3 unexplained trips to New York that coincided with no Meridian meetings. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because we needed to see how deep the conspiracy went. And because—" Kyle hesitated. "Because we suspected you might be compromised too." David felt something cold settle in his chest. "You thought I was a traitor. I thought you were a man whose wife and in-laws were manipulating him, and I wasn't sure which side you'd choose when it came down to it." Agent Collins approached them as the last of the suspects were loaded into vehicles. "Mr. Bennett, we need you to come with us for debriefing. This operation isn't over yet." "What do you mean?" "Meridian Solutions was planning to use your company as an entry point for a much larger operation. They've been systematically compromising defense contractors across the country. Your company was supposed to be the keystone that gave them access to everything else." David looked toward the house where Jennifer and Emma waited, then back at Kyle. "My family. Jennifer will be charged as an accessory, but given her cooperation tonight and the coercion involved, she'll likely face minimal prison time. The in-laws are looking at 20 to life for treason. And Emma, that's up to you, David. You're not being charged with anything. In fact, given what we've learned about your unauthorized rescue operations in Afghanistan, there's talk of a congressional commendation rather than prosecution." David absorbed this information with the same tactical calm he'd maintained all evening. His wife would go to prison. His in-laws would likely die behind bars. His daughter would grow up knowing her mother was a convicted traitor. But as he looked at Kyle, the man who'd risked everything to protect both David and national security, David realized that some betrayals cut deeper than others. "Kyle, you've been investigating me for 4 months. You've had surveillance on my family, monitored our communications, and built a federal case without telling me. You suspected I might choose my wife over my country." Kyle's expression remained neutral. "That's right. And you were willing to let me walk into this trap tonight without warning me, just to see what I'd do. If you'd chosen to cooperate with Meridian, we would have arrested you too." David nodded slowly, understanding the full scope of what had transpired. Everyone he'd trusted, his wife, his in-laws, his business partner, had been operating with their own agendas. The only difference was that Kyle's agenda aligned with national security rather than personal gain. But betrayal was still betrayal, regardless of motivation. "Agent Collins," David said, "I'll need a few minutes with my daughter before we leave." "Of course. Take the time you need." As David walked toward the house, Kyle called after him. "David, what happens now? With the company, I mean." David paused without turning around. "You'll find out tomorrow morning when the paperwork is filed." The tone in David's voice made Kyle's blood run cold. After 20 years of partnership, he knew that tone meant David Bennett had reached a decision that couldn't be appealed or negotiated. Kyle Morrison had chosen to investigate his partner rather than trust him. It had been the right choice for national security, but it had been the wrong choice for their friendship. And David Bennett never forgave betrayal from anyone, even when that betrayal came from the right motives. Chapter 6: A Father's Choice. David found Jennifer and Emma in Jennifer's childhood bedroom, sitting together on the twin bed, surrounded by faded posters and high school memories. Emma was curled against her mother's side, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand its source. "Daddy!" Emma looked up with relief as he entered. "Mommy said there were bad men here, but they're gone now, right?" David knelt beside the bed, meeting his daughter's eyes. At 8 years old, Emma had his dark hair and Jennifer's green eyes, with an intelligence that made her seem older than her years. She deserved the truth, even if it was a version she could understand. "Emma, sweetheart, some people made very bad choices tonight. Choices that are going to change our family." "What kind of changes?" David glanced at Jennifer, who was silently crying. "Mommy is going to have to go away for a while. She did something wrong to try to protect us, but grown-ups can't break the law even when they think they're helping." Emma's face crumpled. "How long is a while?" "We don't know yet, but you and I are going to take care of each other, okay?" "But what about Grandma and Grandpa? They're going away too, baby girl. They made the same kind of bad choices." Emma processed this with the startling adaptability of children. "Will we still live in our house?" "For now, but things are going to be different." Jennifer finally spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "David, I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was protecting her, protecting you." David's response was measured, final. "You made your choice, Jennifer. Now you live with the consequences." But Emma needs her mother. Emma needs a mother who puts her safety above everything else. You put foreign agents and your father's greed above your daughter's welfare. I was scared. They threatened to kill you, to kill Emma. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to trust me. You were supposed to remember that I spent 20 years protecting people, and that I might have been able to protect my own family if you'd given me the chance. Agent Collins appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Bennett, we need to move." David stood and lifted Emma into his arms. "Are you ready for an adventure, sweetheart?" "Where are we going?" "To stay with Uncle Kyle for a few days while the police finish their work." It was a lie, but necessary one. David had no intention of staying with Kyle Morrison or anyone else connected to this betrayal. He had safe houses, resources, and contingency plans that none of them knew about. As they walked toward the front door, Emma turned to wave at Jennifer. "Bye, Mommy. I love you." Jennifer's sob echoed through the hallway, but David didn't slow down or look back. Outside, Kyle waited by one of the SUVs. "David, we need to talk about the company, about next steps." "The company is dissolved as of tonight," David said, settling Emma into a car seat. "All assets will be liquidated and the proceeds donated to military family charities." Kyle's face went pale. "You can't do that. We have contracts, obligations. I could do whatever I want with my company. I'm a majority shareholder, remember?" "David, be reasonable. We can rebuild, move past this." "No, Kyle, we can't." David's voice was final. "You chose to investigate me instead of trusting me. You were right to do it from a national security perspective, but it ended our partnership the moment you made that choice. So what are you going to do now?" David looked at his daughter, then at the house where his wife and in-laws were being processed as federal prisoners. "I'm going to disappear for a while. When I come back, it will be with a new identity, a new business, and a daughter who's learned that family loyalty is earned, not given." "David, you can't just disappear. The FBI will need you for testimony, The FBI has everything they need. I'm not a suspect, I'm not under investigation, and I'm not required to stay in Connecticut." David started the engine. "Tell Agent Collins that if she needs me, she can reach me through my attorney." As David pulled away from the house, Emma asked, "Daddy, are we really going to Uncle Kyle's?" "No, sweetheart. We're going somewhere much better. Somewhere we can start over and build a new life together. Just us. Just us. You and me against the world." In the rearview mirror, David watched Kyle Morrison standing in the driveway, surrounded by federal agents and the wreckage of everything they built together. Kyle had made the right choice for his country, but the wrong choice for their friendship. Jennifer had made the wrong choice for everyone. Harold and Patricia had made the choice to prioritize money over family. All of them would live with the consequences of those choices while David Bennett and his daughter disappeared into a network of safe houses and new identities that would keep them secure until David decided how to extract his final revenge. Because David Bennett never forgave betrayal, and he'd just been betrayed by every adult he'd trusted with his daughter's safety. The game was far from over. Chapter 7, Ghost Protocol. 6 months after the Thanksgiving betrayal, David Bennett no longer existed in any official capacity. The man who'd driven away from his in-laws' house that night had disappeared into a network of former military contacts and off-the-book security protocols, emerging as Thomas Mitchell, a widowed security consultant based in Montana. Emma, now legally known as Sarah Mitchell, adapted to their new life with the resilience of a child who trusted her father completely. She attended a private school under her new identity, made friends easily, and rarely asked about her mother or grandparents. David had told her they were away for their bad choices, and Emma seemed content with that explanation. What Emma didn't know was that her father spent his evenings coordinating an elaborate revenge scheme that would destroy everyone who'd betrayed them. From his home office in Missoula, David maintained surveillance on his former life through a network of contacts Kyle Morrison never knew existed. Private investigators, former Special Forces operatives working in corporate security, and information brokers who owed David favors from his military days. Jennifer had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for conspiracy and accessory charges. She was currently serving her time at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania, spending her days in the prison library and her evenings writing letters to Emma that David intercepted and destroyed without reading. Harold Bennett had received a 25-year sentence for treason and was serving his time in federal supermax in Colorado. The proud family lawyer who'd sold out his country for $200,000 was spending 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, his legal career and reputation permanently destroyed. Patricia Bennett had suffered a massive stroke during her trial and was serving her 15-year sentence in the federal medical facility in Texas, partially paralyzed and dependent on round-the-clock care that cost the government more per day than most people earned in a month. But David's most elaborate revenge was reserved for Kyle Morrison. Kyle had rebuilt Bennett's security solutions under a new name, Morrison Strategic Solutions, using the client contacts and security protocols he developed during their partnership. What Kyle didn't know was that every major contract he'd secured in the past 6 months had been influenced by David's invisible hand. Apex Defense Systems, Morrison's largest client, was owned by a shell company that traced back to David's hidden assets. Meridian Technologies, Kyle's second biggest account, was a legitimate security firm run by David's former Special Forces colleagues. Northern Security Consortium, Kyle's newest and most prestigious client, was David himself operating under multiple layers of corporate protection. Kyle Morrison was working for the man he'd betrayed, generating profits that funded David's new life and Emma's education, all while believing he'd successfully moved past the Thanksgiving disaster. But the surveillance was just preparation. The real revenge was about to begin. David's secure phone rang as he reviewed the evening's intelligence reports. The caller ID showed a number he'd been expecting. Mitchell, it's Phillips. Everything's in place. Morrison just signed the final contracts. Mac Phillips had been instrumental in establishing David's new identity and his shadow ownership of Kyle's major clients. As a Pentagon intelligence officer, Mac had access to resources that made David's disappearance completely bulletproof. How long before he realizes what's happened? 3 hours. The contract terms kick in at midnight tonight. He'll lose everything simultaneously: his client base, his office lease, his security clearances, and his bank accounts. David smiled grimly. Kyle Morrison would wake up tomorrow morning to discover that his entire business empire belonged to a network of shell companies controlled by the partner he'd investigated and betrayed. And the other component? Jennifer's parole hearing is next week. The paperwork you requested has been filed. David had used his connections in the federal system to ensure that Jennifer's parole application would be denied on the grounds that her daughter's current location was unknown. The system couldn't release her to a family situation they couldn't verify, especially given the national security implications of her case. What the parole board didn't know was that David could end Jennifer's imprisonment any time he chose by revealing Emma's location. But he decided that 3 years wasn't nearly long enough for someone who betrayed their child's safety. Sir, Emma appeared in his office doorway, wearing pajamas and holding her stuffed elephant. I had a bad dream. David immediately closed his laptop and turned his full attention to his daughter. What kind of bad dream, sweetheart? I dreamed that mommy came back, but she was angry because I forgot what she looked like. David's chest tightened. Emma rarely mentioned Jennifer anymore, but the dream suggested she was struggling with the absence more than she let on during the day. Do you want to talk about mommy? Emma climbed into his lap, something she'd been doing more frequently as she processed their new life. Is she still in trouble? Yes, she is. Will she always be in trouble? David considered his answer carefully. That depends on whether she learns from her mistakes. What if she says she's sorry? Would you forgive her then? David looked into his daughter's innocent eyes and saw the hope there, the natural desire of a child to have her family whole again. But David Bennett's code didn't allow for forgiveness of betrayal, even when it broke his daughter's heart. Sometimes, sweetheart, adults make choices that can't be fixed with sorry. Mommy made choices that put you in danger, and forgiveness won't change that. But you still love me, right? Even if I make bad choices. You're my daughter, Emma. Nothing you could ever do would change how much I love you. But the adults who were supposed to protect you chose to put other things first. That's different. Emma nodded solemnly, processing this distinction between child mistakes and adult betrayals. Will I ever see mommy again? Maybe. When you're older, when you can understand everything that happened, you could decide for yourself if you want to see her. What about Uncle Kyle? David's expression hardened. Uncle Kyle won't be part of our lives anymore. Emma accepted this with the same matter-of-fact resilience she'd shown throughout their new life. She'd learned to trust her father's judgment completely, understanding instinctively that the adults who'd been removed from their lives had done something unforgivable. As David tucked Emma back into bed, he reflected on the conversation. His daughter was growing up understanding that betrayal had consequences, that trust was earned rather than given, and that family loyalty was a choice rather than an obligation. Tomorrow morning, Kyle Morrison would learn that same lesson when he discovered that his business empire had been systematically dismantled by the partner he'd chosen to investigate rather than trust. The revenge David Bennett had been orchestrating for 6 months was finally ready to spring its final trap. Chapter 8. Reckoning. Kyle Morrison's world collapsed at exactly 12:01 a.m. Mountain Time as automated systems triggered by David's carefully orchestrated contracts began their work. The first sign of trouble came when Kyle's keycard no longer worked at the Morrison Strategic Solutions office building. The second came when he discovered his business bank accounts had been frozen for suspicious activity related to shell company investigations. The third came when he called his largest client, Apex Defense Systems, only to be informed that their contract had been terminated due to a change in operational requirements. By sunrise, Kyle Morrison's empire had been reduced to a cell phone that would stop working when the bill came due next week, and a personal bank account that contained exactly enough money to cover 1 month's rent on his apartment. Kyle understood immediately what had happened. Only one person had the resources, the connections, and the tactical brilliance to orchestrate such a complete and simultaneous destruction of everything Kyle had built. David Bennett was alive, active, and very, very angry. Kyle's hands shook as he dialed the number he'd memorized but never expected to use. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Hello, Kyle. David. I know it's you. I know what you've done. Do you? Tell me what you think you know. Kyle looked around his empty office, noting the security cameras that had probably been feeding information to David for months. You own all my clients. The contracts I signed gave you operational control of everything I built. You've been watching me, manipulating me, and now you've taken everything. Very good. Your analytical skills haven't deteriorated. Why now? Why wait 6 months? Because I wanted you to understand what you'd built, how successful you'd become, how bright your future looked. I wanted you to feel secure and confident before I took it all away. Kyle closed his eyes, recognizing the tactical psychology he'd seen David use on enemies overseas. You wanted me to experience the betrayal the way you did. Exactly. You chose to investigate me instead of trusting me. You suspected I might choose my wife over my country. You were willing to let me walk into that trap without warning me, just to see what I'd do. I made the right choice for national security. You made the right choice for the mission, David corrected. But you made the wrong choice for our partnership. And now you're learning what it feels like when someone you trust uses your own success against you. Kyle felt the weight of David's words settling on his shoulders. For 6 months, he'd been working for the man he'd betrayed, generating profits that funded David's new life, all while believing he'd successfully moved past their destroyed partnership. What happens now? Now you start over with nothing, just like I did. Except I had a daughter to protect, and you just have yourself. David, I had to make a choice between friendship and duty. And you chose duty. I respect that choice, Kyle. But choices have consequences, and this is yours. Kyle looked around his empty office one more time, understanding that this conversation was his only chance to salvage anything from the wreckage of his life. What about Emma? What about Jennifer? Emma is safe, happy, and learning important lessons about trust and loyalty. Jennifer is serving her sentence and will continue to do so until I decide otherwise. You're controlling her parole? I'm ensuring that my daughter doesn't have to see her mother until she's old enough to understand why that woman betrayed her family. Kyle heard something in David's voice that made his blood run cold, a finality that suggested Jennifer's imprisonment might last far longer than her original sentence. David, Emma needs her mother. Emma needs adults she can trust. Jennifer forfeited her right to be that person when she chose to work with foreign agents. And me? Did I forfeit my right to be her uncle when I chose to protect national security? The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute before David answered. You forfeited your right to be anything to my family when you decided to investigate me instead of trusting me. The fact that you were right to do it doesn't change the betrayal. Kyle understood that this was David's final word on their destroyed friendship. There would be no forgiveness, no second chances, no opportunity to rebuild what they'd once had. So this is revenge. This is justice. You wanted to see what I'd do when forced to choose between family and duty. Now you know. I chose duty, and I chose my daughter. The difference is that my choice was right. The line went dead, leaving Kyle alone in his empty office with a complete understanding that David Bennett's revenge was both personal and perfect. Kyle had lost everything he'd built using David's methods, David's contacts, and David's trust. More importantly, Kyle now understood that David's disappearance hadn't been an escape. It had been a strategic withdrawal while he prepared to destroy everyone who'd betrayed him. Jennifer would serve additional years in prison. Harold and Patricia would die behind bars. Kyle would start over with nothing, and David Bennett would raise his daughter to understand that betrayal, even well-intentioned betrayal, came with permanent consequences. As Kyle walked out of his former office for the last time, he realized that David had given him something more valuable than forgiveness. He'd given him a complete understanding of why David Bennett never forgave anyone who betrayed him. Some lessons could only be learned through experience, and Kyle Morrison had just graduated from David Bennett's masterclass in the consequences of broken trust. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 2 years after the Thanksgiving betrayal, David Bennett sat on the porch of his Montana ranch watching 10-year-old Emma, now legally Sarah Mitchell, practice her marksmanship with a junior rifle. She'd grown taller, more confident, and had developed the kind of focused intensity that reminded David of himself at that age. "Dad, I hit the target 8 out of 10 times, Emma called out, her voice carrying across the meadow. "Excellent work, sweetheart. Remember to control your breathing." Emma nodded and resumed her stance, her form perfect after months of instruction. David had decided that his daughter would never again be defenseless against people who might threaten her safety. She was learning marksmanship, martial arts, situational awareness, and most importantly, how to recognize when adults had ulterior motives. David's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Mac Phillips. Jennifer's second parole application denied. Morrison attempted suicide last week. Survived, hospitalized. Harold died in prison yesterday. Heart attack. David felt no satisfaction at Harold's death, only the grim completion of consequences that had been set in motion that Thanksgiving night. Harold Bennett had chosen money over family loyalty and had died alone in a federal supermax. His reputation destroyed and his daughter imprisoned because of his choices. Patricia remained in federal medical custody, her stroke-related disabilities making her more of a burden on the system than a functional prisoner. She would likely die in government care, another casualty of greed and betrayal. Kyle Morrison's attempted suicide suggested that the psychological impact of David's revenge had been more devastating than the financial destruction. Kyle had lost everything he'd built, but more importantly, he'd lost the sense of honor and integrity that had defined his identity as a former Navy SEAL. Learning that he'd worked for the man he'd betrayed for over a year had shattered something fundamental in Kyle's psyche. Jennifer's continued imprisonment was the most complex element of David's revenge. She'd served 4 years of a 3-year sentence because David's influence ensured her parole applications were denied on technicalities. The system couldn't release her to an unknown family situation, and David had no intention of revealing Emma's location until his daughter was old enough to make her own choices about maternal contact. "Dad, can we practice hand-to-hand combat now?" Emma asked, approaching the porch with her rifle properly secured. "Did you clean your weapon?" "Yes, sir. Field stripped, cleaned, and stored according to protocol." David smiled at his daughter's military precision. "Then yes, we can practice. But first, tell me the 3 rules of engagement. 1. Never start a fight, but always finish it. 2. Use minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat. 3. Protect yourself and innocent people. Never seek revenge." "Good. And what makes someone worthy of trust?" "Their actions over time, not their words or their relationship to me." "And what do we do with people who betray that trust?" Emma's expression grew serious. "We remove them from our lives permanently. Betrayal can't be forgiven because it shows who they really are when they think they can get away with it." David nodded approvingly. Emma was learning the lessons that would protect her for the rest of her life. She would never be as naive as he'd been, never trust family members simply because they were family, never assume that love and loyalty were the same thing. As they practiced defensive combat techniques, David reflected on the path that had brought them to this Montana ranch. He'd lost everything he thought he valued: his wife, his business partnership, his extended family, his old identity. But he'd gained something more valuable: absolute certainty about who deserved his trust and loyalty. Emma had proven herself worthy of his complete devotion through her resilience, adaptability, and unwavering trust in his judgment. She'd never questioned his decisions, never asked to contact the people he'd removed from their lives, never made him choose between her welfare and misplaced family loyalty. "Dad, do you ever miss our old life?" Emma asked as they took a water break. "I miss the illusion of having a larger family," David replied honestly. "But I don't miss the reality of what those people were actually like." "Do you think I want to see Mom someday?" David considered his answer carefully. "You might. And when you're old enough to make that decision based on full knowledge of what happened, I'll support whatever choice you make. But you'll never forgive her." "No, sweetheart, I won't. But your relationship with her doesn't have to be the same as mine." Emma nodded, understanding the distinction between David's permanent judgment and her own future choices. She was learning that forgiveness was optional, that family relationships required mutual respect and trust, and that her father's love for her was unconditional while his tolerance for betrayal was non-existent. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, David watched his daughter practicing her defensive techniques with focused determination. She was growing up to be exactly the kind of person he'd hoped: strong, intelligent, loyal, and completely intolerant of people who might try to manipulate or betray her. Jennifer would eventually be released from prison to discover that her daughter had become someone she'd never recognize, someone who understood that trust was earned and betrayal was permanent. Kyle Morrison, if he survived his psychological breakdown, would spend the rest of his life understanding that choosing duty over friendship had cost him everything he'd valued. Harold was dead, Patricia was dying, and their legacy was the destruction of their family through greed and betrayal. David Bennett had lost his old life completely, but he'd built something better from the ashes: a relationship with his daughter based on absolute trust, mutual respect, and the shared understanding that loyalty was the foundation of any meaningful connection. The revenge he'd orchestrated had been perfect in its scope and execution, But it was the life he'd built afterward that truly mattered. David Bennett never forgave betrayal, but he discovered that some losses led to gains that were worth more than what had been destroyed. Emma was living proof that the right people, treated with complete honesty and respect, could build something unshakable together. The rest of the world could learn that lesson the hard way, just as everyone who betrayed them had learned it. David Bennett's code remained unchanged. Betrayal was permanent. Forgiveness was impossible, but loyalty, when earned and properly given, could create something worth protecting with ruthless determination. The Thanksgiving betrayal had ended one life and begun another. The second life was infinitely better than the first. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. To our wonderful community at Infidelity Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence keeps us motivated. Quick question, what part of the globe are you tuning in from? Whether it's morning or night where you are, let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Foundations of Sand. Russell Montgomery wiped the sweat from his brow as he inspected the construction site of what would become the crown jewel of his real estate empire, the Montgomery Plaza. At 45, Russell had built his development company from nothing, surviving the 2008 crash when others folded, and emerging stronger by acquiring distressed properties others couldn't handle. "Boss," the supplier called. "The Italian marbles delayed again," said Hector, his project manager. Russell nodded, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. "Tell them if it's not here by Friday. We're canceling and going with the Turkish supplier." His voice carried the authoritative edge that had earned him respect in an industry dominated by inherited wealth and connections. Unlike his competitors, Russell hadn't attended Ivy League schools or inherited a family business. He'd started as a carpenter's apprentice at 16 after his alcoholic father abandoned the family, working double shifts to put himself through night school. By 30, he'd completed his first small development. By 40, Montgomery Development was handling projects worth tens of millions. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A text from his wife, Adrian. Dinner with the Whitakers canceled. Going out with Brooke instead. Don't wait up. Russell frowned. Third time this month. Adrian had been increasingly distant in their 17-year marriage. He typed back, "Anniversary dinner tomorrow still on?" The reply came quickly. Of course. Wouldn't miss it. Later that evening, Russell sat at his home office desk, reviewing blueprints for a new development while occasionally glancing at the family portrait on his wall. Himself, Adrian with her striking auburn hair, their daughter Vanessa, 19, home from her first year at UCLA, and son Dominic, 16, with his perpetual half-smile. The sound of the garage door opening pulled his attention. Russell checked his watch, 11:47 p.m. He heard Adrienne's heels clicking on the marble floor, followed by her slipping into their bedroom without stopping by his office to say goodnight, something that had become routine lately. When Russell entered their bedroom 20 minutes later, Adrian was already pretending to be asleep. He noticed a faint scent, an unfamiliar cologne that definitely wasn't hers. Next to her nightstand lay a matchbook from the Ravens Lounge, an upscale bar downtown that wasn't anywhere near Brooke's neighborhood. Russell stood in the dark for a long moment, the pieces falling into place like the foundation of a building he never wanted to construct. Chapter 2, Fault Lines. The Montgomery anniversary dinner reservation was at Castellano's, the high-end Italian restaurant where Russell had proposed 17 years earlier. Russell arrived early, instructing the staff to prepare the special wine he'd ordered weeks ago, a vintage from the year they met. At 7:30, there was no sign of Adrian. By 8:15, Russell had drained his first glass alone, ignoring the pitying glances from the waitstaff. At 8:45, he received the text, "So sorry. Meeting with real estate agent about mom's condo ran late. Can we reschedule?" Instead of responding, Russell paid for the untouched meal and drove to his mother-in-law's condo building. The security guard, recognizing him, mentioned that he'd just missed Mrs. Montgomery. She left with that tall fellow with the fancy watch. They've been coming by to check on the place since Mrs. Palmer went to Florida. Tall fellow? Russell asked, his voice eerily calm despite the rage building inside him. Yes, sir. Mr. Bradley, I think. They've been here several times this month. Bradley. The name registered immediately. Lawrence Bradley, the silver-haired investment genius who joined their country club last year. Recently divorced, mid-50s, with a smile that showed too many teeth and a habit of touching women's arms when speaking to them. Russell drove to the Ravens Lounge, where the bartender recognized him as a generous tipper. When Russell mentioned he was looking for his wife, the bartender replied, "The lady with the auburn hair? She's a regular with Mr. Bradley. They usually take the corner booth." That night, Russell hired Diana Vega, a former military intelligence officer turned private investigator. "I need everything on Lawrence Bradley and evidence of my wife's affair," he instructed. "And I need absolute discretion." 3 weeks later, Diana delivered a comprehensive file. Lawrence Bradley had married and divorced 3 wealthy women in the past 15 years. Each divorce had left him substantially wealthier. He specifically targeted women in long-term marriages to successful men, particularly those feeling neglected due to their husbands' busy careers. The surveillance photos showed Adrian and Lawrence in intimate situations at hotels, restaurants, and even on his yacht. Text message records revealed they'd been involved for 7 months. Most damning were audio recordings from their recent meetings discussing plans for Adrian to divorce Russell. "Once the divorce is final, we'll have at least $20 million, Lawrence had said. "That workaholic won't even notice you're gone until the papers are served." Adrian's laughter had cut through Russell like a blade. Russ built himself up from nothing. He's good at business, but he has no idea what's happening in his own home. Dominic already thinks you're amazing, and Vanessa hardly speaks to him anyway. It'll be a clean break. Russell listened to the recordings in his office, his expression hardening with each word. When he finally spoke to Diana, his voice was cold steel. "Find out everything about Bradley's finances. I want to know his weaknesses, his vices, and everyone he's ever wronged." Russell's eyes reflected something dangerous. "And give me information on his previous wives." Chapter 3. The Demolition. On a rainy Thursday, Adrian Montgomery received divorce papers at her yoga class. By evening, the news had spread through their social circle. Russell had moved out of their home and into the penthouse apartment above his office building, leaving without confrontation or explanation. "Dad's gone," Dominic informed his sister Vanessa over the phone. "Mom says they're separating and it's mutual, but she was crying when she thought I couldn't hear." Vanessa, away at college, was shocked but not entirely surprised. "Did she say why?" "No, but Lawrence came over to support her. He's been here a lot lately." Within days, Lawrence had practically moved into the Montgomery residence, helping Adrian through this difficult transition. Meanwhile, Russell remained silent, not responding to calls from friends or family, focusing entirely on work. The preliminary divorce hearing revealed Russell's strategy. He'd transferred majority ownership of Montgomery Development to a trust years earlier, a detail Adrian's attorney had overlooked. The judge appointed a financial evaluator to determine the marital assets, but it was clear the settlement wouldn't be the windfall Lawrence had anticipated. After the hearing, Adrian approached Russell for the first time since he'd left. "Why are you making this so difficult? We can end this amicably." Russell studied her face, the face he'd loved for nearly 2 decades, and felt nothing. "Amicably? Like discussing your plans with Lawrence to take half my company while sleeping in our bed?" The color drained from Adrian's face. "You knew. For months." Russell's voice remained unervingly calm. "Did you really think I built an empire by being oblivious to betrayal? Tell Lawrence I look forward to meeting him properly. After all, he's spending time with my son." That evening, Lawrence comforted Adrian at their home. "Don't worry, darling. He's just posturing. Once the evaluator digs into his finances, we'll get what we deserve." What they didn't know was that Russell had already set in motion a plan that would destroy them both, not through legal battles, but through a calculated dismantling of everything they thought they knew. In his penthouse, Russell stared out at the city lights, phone in hand. "It's time," he told Diana. "Contact Bradley's ex-wives and tell Nolan I'm ready to meet." Nolan Price had once been Lawrence's business partner before being forced out of their investment firm years ago. He lost everything and had been waiting patiently for a chance at revenge. Now Russell was offering him exactly that. Chapter 4. Blueprint for Vengeance. 6 months into the divorce proceedings, Russell Montgomery was unrecognizable to those who knew him before. The successful but somewhat soft-around-the-middle developer had transformed into a lean, focused weapon. Every morning began with a punishing workout in his private gym, followed by meetings with his expanding team of allies. Bradley's financial situation is worse than we thought, Diana reported in Russell's office. He's leveraged to the hilt. 3 failed investments in the past year, and he's been borrowing against his assets to maintain appearances. Russell nodded, studying the financial documents spread across his desk. And my son, Diana's expression softened slightly. Dominic is struggling. His grades are dropping, and he's been in 2 fights at school. He idolizes Bradley, who's been playing the father figure role. Expensive gifts, sports games, the works. And Vanessa? She's maintained her distance from both Adrian and Bradley. She's tried calling you several times. Russell's jaw tightened. Not yet. She chose her side when she told her mother about my offshore accounts. Accounts that don't actually exist, Diana reminded him. The misinformation worked. Bradley and Adrian are convinced you're hiding millions. The door opened, and Nolan Price entered, a thin man with calculating eyes who had once lost everything to Lawrence Bradley's manipulations. It's confirmed, Nolan announced. Bradley's taking investor meetings for the Westlake project, using your preliminary designs as if they're finalized. Russell smiled coldly. Perfect. And our inside man. In position. Bradley believes Flynn is a legitimate international investor eager to get in on the ground floor. Flynn McAdams was another of Bradley's victims, a contractor who'd been bankrupted after Bradley pulled financing mid-project years earlier. Now operating under a new identity, Flynn was playing the role of a wealthy European developer interested in Bradley's vision. The Westlake property? Russell asked. The owners agreed to our terms, Diana confirmed. She'll string Bradley along, but only sign with us. Russell turned to the window, surveying the city where he'd built his legacy. Bradley's convincing investors to fund a development on land he doesn't own and never will, using plans he stole from me. Meanwhile, he's draining his accounts to impress my wife and son. Your wife is getting suspicious, Diana noted. She expected the divorce to be settled by now. The judge's continuances are making her nervous. Judge Matthews owes me for financing his daughter's cancer treatment when the insurance wouldn't cover it, Russell said matter-of-factly. He'll drag this out as long as we need. Later that evening, Russell received an unexpected visitor at his penthouse. Vanessa stood in his doorway, her expression a mixture of anger and concern. You couldn't answer my calls? She demanded. Russell studied his daughter. You made your choice when you helped your mother access my personal files. I didn't know what she was looking for. She said she needed insurance documents. Vanessa pushed past him into the apartment. Mom's different now. She's obsessed with money, with the divorce. And there's something off about him. Russell poured himself a whiskey, not offering one to his daughter. You're an adult, Vanessa. You made your choice. What about Dom? He's just a kid. Lawrence has him completely fooled. Tears welled in her eyes. I heard them talking about sending him to some boarding school in Switzerland after the divorce, away from everyone he knows. For the first time, Russell's composure cracked slightly. When did you hear this? Last week. I came home to get some things. They didn't know I was there. Vanessa hesitated. I've been doing some research on Lawrence. Did you know he's been married 3 times before? And each wife was wealthy when they married and almost broke after. Russell studied his daughter with new interest. What else have you discovered? He has a pattern. He finds wealthy married women, becomes their confidant, convinces them their husbands are hiding assets, then helps them divorce. Once he has access to their money, it vanishes in investments. Vanessa pulled out her phone, showing Russell her research. I'm studying investigative journalism, Dad. This is what I do. For the first time in months, Russell felt a flicker of pride. What do you want from me, Vanessa? Let me help you. Whatever you're planning, and I know you're planning something, let me be part of it. For Dom's sake, if not for yours. Russell considered his daughter carefully, then nodded once. Be at this address tomorrow at noon. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Not even your boyfriend. I don't have a boyfriend, Vanessa replied with a hint of her father's determination. I've been too busy investigating the man who's trying to steal from my family. Chapter 5. Laying the Foundation. The warehouse space Russell had converted into his operations center hummed with activity. Boards displayed photos, timelines, and connection maps between Lawrence Bradley and his previous victims. Diana supervised 2 analysts processing financial data, while Nolan coordinated with Flynn about their next investor meeting. When Vanessa entered, everyone fell silent. Everyone, this is my daughter, Vanessa. She's joining us. Russell's tone made it clear this wasn't up for discussion. Over the next hours, Russell revealed the extent of his plan to Vanessa. Lawrence Bradley had convinced Adrian that Russell was hiding at least $30 million in offshore accounts. In reality, those accounts were elaborate facades created by Russell's team, digital breadcrumbs leading nowhere. Bradley's convinced your mother to invest every penny she can access into his Westlake development, Russell explained. A project that will never break ground because I already have the land under contract. But Mom doesn't have millions to invest, Vanessa protested. She's liquidated her inheritance, maxed out credit lines, and borrowed against her portion of the house, Diana interjected. Bradley's convinced her it's the opportunity of a lifetime. Meanwhile, Nolan continued, we have investors lined up ready to pull out at the critical moment, leaving Bradley overextended and unable to return the money. Vanessa processed this information. So you're going to bankrupt him? That's the revenge. Russell smiled thinly. That's just the beginning. Bradley's previous wives have agreed to testify about how he manipulated them. We've documented every false statement he's made to investors. When this collapses, he'll face criminal charges. And Mom, Vanessa asked quietly. Russell's expression hardened. She made her choice. She's still our mother, Vanessa insisted. And she's being manipulated by an expert. Who told you I was hiding money? Who convinced you to search my office? Russell demanded. It wasn't Bradley. It was your mother. She wasn't tricked into betraying me. She chose to. The tension was broken by Diana's phone ringing. After a brief conversation, she turned to Russell. Dominic got into another fight at school. He's been suspended. Russell checked his watch. Adrian will be at her therapy appointment for another hour. Bradley's meeting investors downtown. He grabbed his keys. I'll handle this. At Westwood Academy, Russell found his son sitting outside the principal's office, sporting a split lip and bruised knuckles. What are you doing here? Dominic asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and resentment. You're still my son, Russell replied simply. Principal Martinez welcomed Russell into her office. Mr. Montgomery, I'm surprised to see you instead of Mrs. Montgomery or Mr. Bradley. I'm still Dominic's father, Russell stated firmly. What happened? Dominic punched another student who suggested that his mother was. She paused delicately. Involved with Mr. Bradley before your separation. Russell turned to his son. Is that true? Dominic stared at the floor. Lawrence said, I need to defend our family's honor. That you abandoned us, and we need to stick together. Russell felt a surge of cold fury that he carefully contained. Principal Martinez, may I have a moment alone with my son? Once they were alone, Russell sat across from Dominic. Son, do you remember when you were 10 and you broke my signed baseball trying to practice indoors? Dominic looked up, confused by the change in subject. Yes, you were terrified to tell me. But when you finally did, what happened? You were mad. You said honesty was more important than any possession. Russell nodded. I've never lied to you, Dominic. I didn't abandon our family. I left because your mother was having an affair with Lawrence for months before I moved out. Dominic's face flushed. You're lying. Russell pulled out his phone and played a brief audio clip. Adrian and Lawrence laughing about deceiving Russell. The color drained from Dominic's face. Mom said, she said you two grew apart. That Lawrence only came into the picture after. I know what they told you, Russell said quietly. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm just asking you to question what you've been told. As they left the principal's office, Russell handed Dominic a phone. This is private. Only use it to contact me if you need to. I'm still your father, regardless of what's happening between your mother and me." That evening, Russell briefed his team on a new development. Bradley's accelerated his timeline. He's collecting final investments for Westlake next week instead of next month. "He's getting desperate," Nolan observed. "His creditors must be closing in." "What about the wedding?" Diana asked. Russell's expression darkened. "Still on for 3 weeks from now, according to my sources. They've booked the ballroom at the Renaissance Hotel." Vanessa, who had spent the day going through financial records, looked up in shock. "They're getting married? Already? The divorce isn't even final. Bradley needs legal access to what he thinks is your mother's settlement money," Russell explained. "They're planning a quick ceremony as soon as the divorce is finalized, which you're delaying through Judge Matthews," Vanessa finished, understanding dawning. "You're timing everything to collapse around them at once." Russell nodded. "The final phase begins now. Vanessa, I need you to do something that might be difficult." "What?" "Reconcile with your mother. Tell her you were wrong about me, that you believe Bradley now. I need eyes inside their operation." Vanessa hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I can do that. But what about Dominic?" "Leave your brother to me," Russell said, checking his phone as a message appeared. "Our final player has just confirmed. Everything is falling into place." Chapter 6. Pressure Points. Lawrence Bradley considered himself a master strategist, but lately, things weren't proceeding according to plan. The divorce should have been settled months ago, but Judge Matthews kept finding reasons for delays. Meanwhile, his creditors were becoming increasingly insistent about repayment. "The Westlake investment is solid," he assured Adrian as they discussed finances in their living room. "Once we close this round of funding, we'll have enough to pay off my temporary debts and secure our future." Adrian seemed less confident. "Russell's lawyers keep finding technicalities. What if the divorce settlement isn't what we expected?" "Trust me, darling. I've been through this before. Once the judge sees the evidence of his hidden accounts, we'll get everything we deserve." Lawrence kissed her forehead reassuringly. "And having Vanessa back on our side helps our case immensely." Vanessa had returned to the fold 2 weeks earlier, apologizing for doubting them and offering to help however she could. Lawrence was initially suspicious, but warmed to her presence when she offered insights into her father's business practices. What Lawrence didn't know was that every night, Vanessa transmitted detailed reports to her father's team. She documented conversations, photographed documents, and monitored their plans while maintaining her role as the supportive daughter. Across town, Russell met with Dominic weekly for lunch. Meetings kept secret from Adrian and Lawrence. The boy remained conflicted, but was increasingly uncomfortable with Lawrence's influence over his mother. "He's pushing her to liquidate everything," Dominic told his father during one such lunch. Last night, they were arguing about Mom's jewelry, the pieces from Grandma that she always said would go to Vanessa someday. Lawrence wants her to sell them for the investment. Russell listened carefully. "And how do you feel about that?" Dominic pushed his food around on his plate. "Mom seems scared sometimes. Not of Lawrence, but of what might happen if his plans don't work. She talked about taking out a second mortgage yesterday." "I see." Russell kept his expression neutral. "And how are things at school?" "Better since we talked. I've been spending more time focusing on college applications." Dominic hesitated. "Dad, Lawrence keeps talking about this Swiss boarding school, saying it would look better for college. Do you want to go to Switzerland?" "No," Dominic admitted. "But Mom seems to agree with everything Lawrence says lately." Russell placed his hand on his son's shoulder. "No one is sending you anywhere you don't want to go. I promise you that." Meanwhile, Flynn McAdams, posing as European investor Anton Richter, had become Lawrence's most valued prospect. "My clients are prepared to commit $20 million to Westlake," he informed Lawrence during a meeting, "provided we can finalize before month's end." This news should have delighted Lawrence, but it only increased his anxiety. The land deal for Westlake was proving problematic. The owner kept finding issues with the contract language. Lawrence hadn't told anyone, including Adrian, that he didn't actually have the land secured yet. As Lawrence became increasingly desperate, he made critical mistakes. He borrowed money from questionable sources to maintain appearances. He falsified documents to reassure early investors. He convinced Adrian to sign as guarantor on high-interest loans. Russell monitored these developments with cold satisfaction. He's overextended by at least $12 million, he told his team. The moment we pull the rug out, everything collapses. Diana had also made a crucial discovery. Bradley has a sealed record from 20 years ago. I finally got access. She handed Russell a file. Domestic violence charges from his first marriage. Never prosecuted because his wife withdrew the complaint after receiving a settlement. Russell read through the file carefully. This changes the timeline. We move now, not after the wedding. But the wedding is when everything is supposed to culminate. Nolan protested. Your daughter's revelation, the investors pulling out. The wedding still happens, Russell clarified. But now we have insurance that Adrian will go through with it, even when things start falling apart. He turned to Vanessa. I need you to make sure your mother sees these records. Not directly from you. Make it appear she discovered them accidentally. Vanessa frowned. You want her to know he's violent before the wedding? Won't that stop her from marrying him? No, Russell said grimly. Because by then, she'll be too financially entangled to back out. But it will make her afraid enough to reach out for help when the moment comes. 3 days later, Adrian found the domestic violence records while using Lawrence's laptop. Instead of confronting him immediately, she called Vanessa in panic. I don't know what to do, Adrian confessed. We're so deep into this investment. The wedding is in 10 days. If I confront him, Mom, if he hurt someone before, he could hurt you, Vanessa said, genuinely concerned despite her role in Russell's plan. It's not that simple. I've signed as guarantor on loans. If I back out now, I'll lose everything. Adrienne's voice trembled. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. People change. After hanging up, Vanessa reported the conversation to Russell, who nodded grimly. She'll go through with the wedding. Now we proceed to the final phase. The next day, Lawrence received devastating news. The landowner for Westlake had signed with another developer, Montgomery Development. At the same time, 3 major investors pulled out of his project, citing concerns about the land acquisition. Lawrence kept these developments from Adrian, desperately seeking alternative funding. He approached his last resort, a private lender known for exorbitant rates and aggressive collection methods. Using the last of his legitimate assets as collateral, he secured enough to keep appearances for another 2 weeks. Just enough to get through the wedding and access what he believed would be Adrienne's substantial divorce settlement. What he didn't know was that Russell had insured the divorce judgment, when it finally came down 3 days before the wedding, will be far less generous than anticipated. Chapter 7. The Final Countdown. The Renaissance Hotel ballroom was decorated with tasteful white and silver arrangements that had cost a small fortune. A fortune Lawrence no longer possessed. The wedding was scheduled for 5 p.m., with 200 guests invited to witness Adrian Palmer. She'd resumed her maiden name after the divorce, Mary Lawrence Bradley. In the bridal suite, Adrian sat before the mirror, her makeup artist applying the finishing touches. Vanessa watched from nearby, observing her mother's tense expression. You should be happy, Mom. It's your wedding day, Vanessa said, carefully monitoring her mother's reactions. Adrian forced a smile. Of course I'm happy. It's just been a stressful week with the divorce finally settled. The settlement had blindsided both Adrian and Lawrence. Judge Matthews had recognized only a small portion of the claimed marital assets, awarding Adrian approximately $3 million, a tenth of what Lawrence had anticipated. The hidden offshore accounts they'd been so confident about proving had evaporated under legal scrutiny. Is Lawrence upset about the settlement? Vanessa asked innocently. Adrienne's hands trembled slightly. He was disappointed, naturally, but he says the Westlake project will more than make up for it once it's completed. What Adrian didn't tell Vanessa was that Lawrence had been nearly unrecognizable with rage when the judgment came down, smashing a vase against the wall and threatening to destroy Montgomery completely. She also didn't mention that she'd signed over nearly $2 million of her settlement to Lawrence's project already, believing it was the only way to recoup their losses. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, Lawrence adjusted his bow tie, trying to project confidence despite the maelstrom of disasters surrounding him. That morning, he'd received notice that the private lender was calling in his loan immediately, citing breach of terms. His lawyer had also informed him that several early investors in Westlake were filing complaints with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Lawrence's phone buzzed with a text from Anton Richter. Actually, Flynn, unexpected issues with wire transfer. Need to speak urgently before ceremony. Lawrence cursed under his breath. The $20 million from Richter's European clients was his last hope. Without it, he wouldn't be able to maintain the facade for another week. In yet another room of the hotel, Russell Montgomery sat with his team for final preparations. He wore an expensive suit, but had no intention of attending the ceremony as a guest. Dominic is clear on his role. Russell asked Diana. She nodded. He'll remain with Adrienne's family during the ceremony. He doesn't know the full plan, just that he should stay away from Lawrence and keep his phone on. Russell turned to Vanessa. And you're ready? She took a deep breath. Yes. The waitstaff uniform fits, and I have all the evidence secured. She hesitated. Dad, are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back for any of us. Russell's expression was implacable. Lawrence Bradley has destroyed 3 families before ours. He's violent, manipulative, and has already begun isolating your mother from you and your brother. This ends today. At 4:30 p.m., guests began taking their seats in the ballroom. Among them were several faces unknown to most. Lawrence's 3 ex-wives, positioned strategically throughout the room, investors who had lost money in previous Bradley schemes, and police detectives prepared to act on the evidence Russell had compiled. Lawrence met with Flynn as Richter in a small conference room near the ballroom. My clients are extremely concerned about rumors regarding the land acquisition, Flynn stated coldly. They're requiring additional guarantees before releasing funds. Lawrence fought to maintain his composure. What kind of guarantees? Personal guarantees from you and your new wife against all your assets, and evidence that the SEC complaints are misunderstandings. Those complaints are nothing. Competitors trying to undermine a successful project, Lawrence insisted. I'll get Adrienne to sign whatever's needed after the ceremony. Flynn checked his watch. My clients need assurances now, or they walk. $20 million doesn't wait for wedding cake. Lawrence loosened his collar, sweat beading on his forehead. Fine, I'll get her signed now. Give me 30 minutes. As Lawrence hurried toward the bridal suite, he didn't notice Russell Montgomery watching from the shadows, a cold smile on his face. Chapter 8. The Collapse. The wedding processional began precisely at 5 p.m. Lawrence stood at the altar, projecting confidence despite his internal panic. He'd been unable to find Adrienne before the ceremony to get her signature on the guarantee documents. Now he would have to wait until after they were married, a delay his financial situation could barely withstand. Adrienne walked down the aisle on her brother's arm, her smile fixed and eyes slightly vacant. In the third row, Dominic sat uncomfortably between his aunt and uncle, constantly checking his phone as instructed by his father. The ceremony proceeded without interruption. Vows were exchanged, and by 5:45 p.m., the officiant proclaimed them husband and wife. As they walked back down the aisle, Lawrence whispered urgently to Adrienne, "We need to sign some paperwork before the reception. It's urgent." The cocktail hour began while the wedding party took photographs. Lawrence pulled Adrienne into a private room where Flynn waited with documents. "This is Anton Richter, our major investor," Lawrence explained quickly. "The funding is ready, but they need our personal guarantee immediately." Adrienne scanned the dense legal document. "I don't understand. This puts everything I have at risk if the project fails." "It won't fail," Lawrence insisted, his charm evaporating under pressure. "Just sign it. Now." Noticing his tone, Flynn played his part. "Perhaps Mrs. Bradley needs time to review with her lawyer? My clients can wait until Monday." "No!" Lawrence's outburst startled both of them. He quickly composed himself. "I apologize. It's wedding day stress. Adrienne, darling, this is just a formality. The project is sound." Reluctantly, Adrienne signed, a decision she would regret within the hour. By 7 p.m., guests were seated for dinner in the grand ballroom. Lawrence had regained his composure, believing the $20 million would solve his immediate problems. When the time came for toasts, he took the microphone with renewed confidence. When I met Adrian, she was trapped in a marriage with a man who didn't appreciate her. He began, glass raised. Today, I'm proud to say I saved her from that broken man. The crowd chuckled appreciatively, raising their glasses. Lawrence, emboldened, continued. Russell Montgomery may have built buildings, but he never built a real home. That's what Adrian and I. He was interrupted by a young waitress who approached the head table and took the microphone from his hand. Before security could intervene, she removed her serving cap, revealing herself as Vanessa Montgomery. I'm Russell Montgomery's daughter, she announced to the stunned crowd. And I have something to say. Lawrence turned ashen, grabbing for the microphone, but Vanessa deftly moved away. For the past month, I've been gathering evidence about the man my mother just married, Vanessa continued. Lawrence Bradley has defrauded investors in the Westlake development, a project for which he doesn't own the land. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Vanessa continued. He has a history of marrying wealthy women, isolating them from family, then leaving them financially ruined. She gestured to 3 women who stood up around the room. His ex-wives are here today, ready to testify to his pattern of abuse and fraud. Lawrence lunged for Vanessa, but was restrained by the hotel's security staff, who had been briefed in advance. The most damning evidence, Vanessa continued, her voice strong despite her trembling hands, is this recording from yesterday, where Lawrence admits his entire plan. She played an audio clip of Lawrence speaking to a colleague. Once I'm married to her, I'll have legal access to what's left of her settlement. Combined with Richter's investment, I can cover my debts and move on. Montgomery will never recover from what I've done to his family and his reputation. Adrian sat frozen in her seat, horror dawning on her face as the full extent of Lawrence's deception became clear. At that moment, 2 police detectives approached the head table. Lawrence Bradley, we're placing you under arrest for multiple counts of investment fraud, falsifying financial documents, and violation of SEC regulations. As Lawrence was being handcuffed, Russell Montgomery entered the ballroom, his timing impeccable. He didn't speak or draw attention to himself, simply watching as the man who had tried to destroy his family was led away, shouting denials and threats. The wedding guests dispersed in shocked confusion, while Adrian remained seated, tears streaming down her face, the magnitude of her mistakes crashing down upon her. Chapter 9. Ashes and Steel. 3 days after the wedding disaster, Russell sat in his office reviewing contracts for the actual Westlake development, a project that would break ground the following month under Montgomery Development's leadership. The land had been secured months earlier, part of his long-term strategy that had inadvertently become the perfect trap for Lawrence Bradley. A knock at his door interrupted his work. Diana entered with a final report. Bradley's bail was denied. With the evidence we provided and the testimony from his ex-wives, the prosecutor is confident he'll serve at least 15 years. Russell nodded. And the investors? Most will recover something through the legal process, but several were unregistered deals. They'll have to pursue civil claims. Make sure Flynn, Nolan, and the others who helped us are protected, Russell instructed. They deserve compensation for their part in this. Diana hesitated. Adrian has been trying to reach you. She's facing bankruptcy. The guarantees she signed for Bradley's loans are being called in, and with the divorce settlement already invested in his fraudulent scheme. That's not my concern, Russell stated flatly. She's the mother of your children, Diana reminded him. She conspired with Bradley to destroy me, to steal from me, and to turn my children against me, Russell replied coldly. The consequences of her choices are hers to bear. Another knock interrupted them. Vanessa entered, followed by Dominic. We want to let you know we're moving my things back in, Vanessa said. If that's okay. Russell raised an eyebrow. You're moving back to the penthouse? Dominic stepped forward. Both of us are. Mom's. She's not in a good place right now. Aunt Patricia is staying with her, but we thought. You thought you'd stay with me, Russell finished for him. Vanessa met her father's gaze directly. Unless you're still holding grudges. Russell studied his children thoughtfully. Vanessa had proven her loyalty during the operation against Bradley, demonstrating intelligence and resilience he hadn't fully appreciated before. Dominic had been manipulated but ultimately saw through the deception. There's room for both of you, he decided. But we need to be clear about something. What happened with your mother wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary lapse in judgment. She made calculated decisions to betray this family. We know, Dad, Vanessa said quietly. We've seen the evidence. We're not asking you to forgive her. Or take her back, Dominic added. Aunt Patricia said Mom's been calling you, talking about reconciliation. Russell's expression hardened. That won't happen. Ever. Later that evening, as promised, Adrian called Russell's private line, a number few people possessed. Russell, please, she began, her voice ragged from crying. I've lost everything. The bank is foreclosing on the house. Lawrence's creditors are coming after me for millions. I made a terrible mistake. Yes, Russell agreed coldly. You did. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but we have 17 years of history, 2 children. Stop. Russell's voice cut like steel. You chose to believe I was hiding money from you. You chose to involve our daughter in searching my office. You chose to tell our son I abandoned the family. You chose Lawrence Bradley over the life we built. I was manipulated, Adrian protested weakly. No, you were greedy. Russell's tone left no room for debate. Bradley promised you more money than what you thought you'd get in a normal divorce. That's why you went along with his schemes. The silence confirmed his assessment. The children are with me now, Russell continued. They've seen everything, all the evidence, all your choices. I won't turn them against you. Your actions have accomplished that already. What am I supposed to do? Adrian whispered. That's not my problem anymore, Russell replied. Goodbye, Adrian. He ended the call and turned to find Vanessa standing in the doorway of his home office. That was harsh, she observed without judgment. Russell shrugged. It was honest. Vanessa studied her father. Lawrence is going to prison. Mom's lost everything. Your revenge is complete. Has it made you feel better? This wasn't about feeling better, Russell explained. It was about justice and protection. Bradley would have drained your mother dry and moved on to his next victim. Your brother would have been shipped off to Switzerland, isolated from everyone who cares about him. And Mom? Was bankrupting her necessary? Russell met his daughter's gaze directly. I gave her multiple chances to see the truth. She chose not to. Her financial situation is the result of her own decisions. Vanessa nodded slowly. When I was helping you gather evidence, I found something interesting in Bradley's past. His first wife, the one who withdrew the domestic violence complaint, she did it because he threatened her children. Russell waited, sensing this conversation had a purpose. I understand why you can't forgive Mom, Vanessa continued. I'm not asking you to, but I'm asking if your revenge against her is truly complete. Russell considered this carefully. What are you suggesting? Mom made terrible choices, but she's still our mother. Letting her lose everything might satisfy your sense of justice, but it doesn't help Dominic or me. Vanessa squared her shoulders. I'm not asking you to bail her out completely, just enough so she can start over somewhere modest, away from here. Russell studied his daughter, so much like him in determination, yet with a compassion he had long since buried. I'll consider it, he finally said. Not for her sake, but for yours and your brother's. The following week, Adrian received legal papers.